3 weeks before our 10th wedding anniversary, my wife asked me, very casually, over breakfast, whether our home insurance policy covered the art collection at full replacement value. I told her yes, of course. The way you answer a question you don't yet realize is a confession. My name is Theo Ashworth. I own a gallery on a quiet street near Madison Avenue, the kind of place that doesn't need a sign because the people who matter already know where to find it. 10 years ago, I married a woman named Marguerite, who I met at an auction house preview, bidding against me on a small, unremarkable Flemish painting that neither of us actually wanted. We laughed about it afterward over coffee. I thought, even then, that there was something slightly performative about her laugh. I married her anyway, because performative laughs can also be charming ones, and I was 34 and tired of being alone in beautiful rooms.
The collection she'd asked about? The one I'd spent a decade carefully assembling. A handful of significant pieces worth, conservatively, somewhere north of $11 million, lived in a climate-controlled room on the 3rd floor of our townhouse, the one Marguerite always called Theo's Museum, with an affection that, in hindsight, had curdled into something closer to resentment years before I noticed the shift. I noticed other things too, eventually. The way you notice a draft in a room you thought was sealed. The increased calls to a contact named Julian Miller, a man Marguerite described as an old friend from before us whenever his name came up, which was rarely, and always with a specific, practiced casualness.
The new safety deposit box she'd opened under her maiden name, which I discovered by accident going through old mail looking for a misplaced insurance document. The sudden enthusiastic interest in planning our 10th anniversary party herself, down to the smallest detail, including which staff would be present and exactly which hour the house would be emptiest of guests. I want to be honest about something here, because honesty matters in a story like this one. I loved Marguerite, or at least I loved the version of her I'd constructed over a decade of marriage. Discovering that version was largely fictional and did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened gradually, the way water finds a crack in a foundation. Slow, then suddenly catastrophic.
The night I finally understood what she was planning, I was standing in the doorway of Theo's museum, looking at a small Rothko study that had taken me 4 years to acquire. And I heard Marguerite on the phone in the next room, her voice low, certain, and entirely unfamiliar to me. "The insurance will cover everything," she was saying. $11 million, easily. We just need the house empty for 40 minutes during the party. Julian's team can be in and out before anyone notices. I stood very still in that doorway, surrounded by a decade of careful acquisitions, and felt something inside me go quiet and sharp at the same time.
I want to tell you that I confronted her immediately. I didn't. I want to tell you I felt nothing but cold, controlled fury. I didn't feel that either. Not entirely. What I felt mostly in the days after overhearing that phone call was an exhausting, disorienting grief. The specific grief of realizing that 10 years of a shared life had been, for some unknown portion of that decade, a performance staged primarily for my benefit. I went back through memories I'd never thought to question. Our wedding at a vineyard in the Hudson Valley. Marguerite radiant in a dress she'd chosen specifically because, she told me at the time, it made her feel like the luckiest woman in New York. Our first anniversary, which she'd cried.
I actually cried looking at a photograph from our wedding day. I used to believe those tears were happiness. Now, I wasn't sure they had ever been anything but rehearsal for a much longer performance. Julian Miller, it turned out, was not an old friend from before us. He was someone Marguerite had reconnected with roughly 14 months earlier, a man with a documented history of organizing high-value theft operations disguised as burglaries, always timed around events with predictable security gaps. I learned this from a private investigator named Odalis Ferreira, a precise, unflappable woman a colleague at the gallery recommended, after I described, carefully and without calling names, the situation I suspected I was in.
He's done this 3 times before, Odalis told me, sliding a folder across her desk 2 weeks later. Different cities, different couples, always married women with access to valuable insured assets, always staged as a break-in during a major social event. He takes a cut, the wife collects the insurance, and eventually disappears, usually citing the trauma of the robbery as grounds for needing space from the marriage. Within a year, in every case we tracked, the marriage ends, and the wife resurfaces somewhere with a noticeably improved financial situation. I sat with that information for a long time. The pattern was clean, almost elegant in its cruelty. Marguerite wasn't just planning to steal from me. She was planning to use the theft of my life's work as the mechanism for ending our marriage on her terms, with insurance money and stolen art functioning as her exit package. The hardest part wasn't the anger, although there was plenty of that. The hardest part was sitting across from her at dinner, 3 nights after I learned the truth, watching her describe the anniversary party's guest list with genuine seeming enthusiasm, watching her ask whether I thought the string quartet should play during cocktail hour or wait until dinner, and understanding that I was watching a woman rehearse the final scene of a marriage she had already, privately, ended.
"You've put so much thought into this," I told her. "It's our 10th anniversary, Theo," she said, smiling the smile I used to think was the most honest thing about her. "Of course I have." I smiled back. "I have too," I said. "More than you know."
Here is the twist, and Marguerite never saw it coming because she never imagined I was capable of planning anything more complicated than acquiring art. What Marguerite didn't know, what Julian Miller didn't know, and what Odalis Ferreira had spent 3 careful weeks helping me arrange was that the $11 million collection she intended to have stolen during our anniversary party had already been quietly replaced. Not the real pieces. Those had been moved 6 weeks earlier into a secure, climate-controlled storage facility under a different name, with documentation Odalis helped me arrange through a colleague who specialized in discreet, high-value art relocation.
What remained in Theo's museum were exceptionally precise, museum-grade reproductions, the kind used for traveling exhibitions when the originals are too fragile or valuable to transport, indistinguishable to the untrained eye, and worth, in terms of actual material value, perhaps $4,000 combined. If Julian's team broke in and removed them during the party, they would be stealing reproductions. If Marguerite filed an insurance claim for $11 million on assets that were no longer, at the time of the alleged theft, actually present in the house, she would not be the victim of a robbery. She would be committing insurance fraud on a felony scale, with documented premeditation, a co-conspirator with a criminal history, and a private investigator's complete timeline proving she'd been planning this scheme for over a month. You understand, Odalis told me 2 days before the party, that once this is set in motion, there's no quiet way to stop it. Marguerite goes through with the burglary as planned, files the claim, and the insurance company's fraud investigators, who I've already discreetly briefed, confirm immediately that the stolen items don't match the actual value or even the actual objects in the house. Or she doesn't go through with it, and you've spent 6 weeks and a great deal of money relocating your collection for nothing. She'll go through with it, I said. She's been planning this for 14 months. She's not going to abandon it 3 days before the party.
Then there's one more thing you should know, Odalis said, sliding a final document across her desk. Julian Miller has an outstanding warrant in 2 states. The moment his team enters your home, regardless of what they find, local police, who I've also discreetly coordinated with, citing a credible tip about a planned burglary, will be waiting. I looked at the document for a long time. 10 years of marriage distilled into a single piece of paper, and a decision I was about to make in the next 48 hours. "Let's have the anniversary party," I said.
The night of our 10th anniversary, the townhouse looked extraordinary. Marguerite had outdone herself. String quartet in the foyer, candlelight throughout, exactly the kind of evening she'd always known how to produce. She moved through the party in a dress the color of champagne, accepting compliments, laughing her practiced laugh, glancing periodically toward the staircase that led to Theo's museum with attention she thought no one else could see. I saw it. I had spent 6 weeks learning to see everything about her differently. At precisely 9:40, exactly when Odalis' timeline had predicted, Marguerite excused herself to check on the caterers.
A transparent cover for ensuring the house's third floor was clear.
I watched her disappear up the stairs, watched two unfamiliar men in plain dark clothing slip through the service entrance moments later, and felt the particular vertiginous calm of someone watching a plan they engineered finally begin to move on its own. What followed wasn't loud. There were no alarms, no sirens cutting through the party below, nothing that would have alerted our 70 guests that anything unusual was happening 3 floors above the cocktail hour. Local police, coordinated quietly through Odalis' contacts, intercepted Julian Miller and his 2 associates inside Theo's museum within 11 minutes, holding reproductions worth a combined $4,000, with Marguerite standing in the doorway, dress still the color of champagne, completely unable to explain to the officers why she happened to be present.
I came upstairs once the situation had stabilized, ostensibly to check on the commotion, and found my wife of 10 years sitting on the museum's hardwood floor, the practiced laugh entirely gone, replaced by something rawer and far less rehearsed. "Theo," she said, "I can explain." "You don't need to explain it to me," I said. "The insurance fraud investigators are downstairs. You can explain it to them, and to the detectives, and eventually, I imagine, to a judge."
I am not going to tell you the months that followed were simple, because divorce after a discovered conspiracy rarely is. Marguerite was charged with conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and accessory to attempted burglary. Julian Miller, facing his outstanding warrants plus new charges, cooperated quickly once he understood how thoroughly the evidence had already been assembled against him. Marguerite's sentence, ultimately, involved restitution, probation, and the particular lasting consequence of a felony record that follows a person into every future job application, every future lease, every future attempt to start over somewhere new. I kept the gallery. I kept the actual collection, safely relocated and fully intact. I kept Odalis Ferreira's number, which I have admittedly used more than once since then for unrelated matters, because some professional relationships outlast the crises that created them. I did not keep the marriage, and I no longer wanted to. People ask me sometimes whether I feel guilty about the elaborate nature of what I did, the relocated art, the reproductions, the quiet coordination with investigators and police. I don't.
Here's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything. The people who plan to take from you almost always assume you're too consumed by love or grief or trust to notice the planning itself. Marguerite spent 14 months building a scheme on the assumption that I would never look closely enough to see it. She forgot that I've spent my entire career learning how to tell the difference between something real and something built to look real. It turns out that skill works on marriages too. There's an old saying in the art world: a forgery doesn't fail because it looks wrong. It fails because somebody, eventually, looks closely enough. Marguerite just didn't expect that somebody to be her own husband, holding the receipts. And honestly, for 14 months of secret planning, hired help, and one very expensive champagne gown, she could have just asked me for a divorce. Would have saved everyone a police report. If this story gave you even a little bit of satisfaction, that's exactly what we're here for. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, where the quiet ones turn out to be 3 steps ahead the whole time. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that karma doesn't knock. It just waits for the right moment to walk through the door.